Welcome in this BIST colloquium series. And it's a big pleasure for me to introduce the speaker. So you have been with him. So most of the people here are master students that have been before with Professor, the speaker. I'm Marvin Marcotti, ICREA professor from Catalan Institute of Nanoscience and Nanotechnology. And it's a big pleasure for me to host today in the framework of BIST colloquium series, Dr. Alireza Dolatshahi-Pirouz, who received a PhD in physics from Aarhus University in 2009. And then he did postdoctoral research in Weiss Institute of Biologically Inspired Engineering and Harvard Medical School. Then he joined Technical University of Denmark as assistant professor in 2015, and later on he started his own research group, Team Bioengine at DTU Nanotech, which is a well-known nanotech center in Denmark. Currently, the group is part of the newly launched department, Health Technology, and the research lies at the crossroads of biology, engineering, physics, chemistry, and biomaterials. The group is aiming to create advanced material innovations based on bio-inspired discoveries, and they are working a lot and believe in these bio-inspired materials and complex nanostructures with interest for different applications, engines, and next big revolution in material science. The group, Dr. Alireza is leading, is exploring, trying to study green solution in the fields of nanomedicine, electronics, and tissue engineering. Along this direction, they introduced also flecoionics and fleconess in 2019, which offers a huge leap forward towards foldable substrates for flexible electronics. And more, the team is currently working on developing new self-healable and stretchable materials with high electrical sensitivity for applications with emerging fields of flexible electronics, cyberorganics, and soft robotics. In 2018, Dr. Alireza received a VD grant to further develop his innovative research on regenerative biomaterials at Rad Budunk. To date, he has published a lot of papers, around 70 papers in very good journals. He is also one of the highly cited young researchers with high citation numbers and high age index according to Google Scholar. So it's a pleasure to have you here. So it's your turn now. Thank you very much.
For the nice introduction, Arvin. I will try to live up to the expectations you just said. But my name is Alireza, and I'm going to talk about some of the work that we have done in my team at DTU. Our team is called Biologically Inspired Material Engineering, and that's short for BioEngine. But we are called Team BioEngine because teamwork is important. I mean, it's not important to have the smartest people. It's important to have the, people with different qualities, people with different talents that can work together as a team. So that's a key in our work. And Arben already introduced me a little bit, so I'm not going to go in depth with that. So in simple terms, I mean, what I focus on is biomaterial science and trying to use that for tissue engineering and for instance, to cure osteoporosis. But I also focus on flexible electronics, as you just saw in the session before. But the question is then, like, how can you combine this with what Anna and Sasha presented in the last session? Because there can actually be a link between those two that can enable, better healthcare. So what is, osteoporosis? Osteoporosis is a disease where, the bone mass is decreasing because of age or because of, menopauses for different reasons. And the idea is to reverse that, decrease in bone density by, for instance, using stem cells. But using stem cells alone without, any insulating layer is actually a problematic thing, because during the needle injection phase, the stem cells can actually die because of the shear forces they're experiencing during the injection phase. And once they're inside the body, they're not going to stay in the same place. They're not going to be retained in the same place. They can actually dissipate throughout the body. But by using these soft hydrogel matrices, we can firstly protect the stem cells during the injection phase, and we can make sure they stay put in the target place. And then we can even maybe stimulate them to turn into bone cells, thereby increasing the decrease in bone mass density that occurs during osteoporosis. But I mean, natural bone is really multifunctional. I mean, as we sit down, stand up, and run around, our bones are exposed to load-bearing forces. So bone is a material, is a living material that can withstand cyclic load-bearing forces. At the same time, it's complicated in terms of its, chemistry and biology, because in the extracellular matrix of bone, you have a host of different factors, such as proteins and growth factors, hyaluronic acid. But what's unique about bone is that it has a soft phase and a hard phase. The hard phase consists of minerals, primarily hydroxyapatite. So bone is really a complicated tissue, as any other tissues in the body. So that's why when you want to kind of develop something for stem cell therapy or for bone implants, you need to focus on these super combinatorial material systems that are tough, they're biomimetic, biocompatible, injectable, and also self-healing. And you might ask, why is that important? That's important because living tissues heal themselves. When you cut your skin, it heals. It's a natural property of living tissues that they can remodel themselves and they can heal upon injury. So you want to have a system that can unite in the body and follow the natural mechanism of healing and remodeling. Otherwise, you have a static material, like for instance a metal, that doesn't change with the body. I mean, your bones are being damaged every day and they're healing themselves. So if you want to have something that's going to integrate with that dynamic environment, it has to be dynamic itself. It has to encompass some of these properties that we have in natural tissues, such as being dynamic and self-healable. And we have a number of these hydrogel systems in our team, but our focus is developing cheap polymers that are green and that are scalable, which you can use for these therapies. For instance, in one of our studies, we took the peel from apple skin and we extracted a polymer called pectin, which is a polysaccharide. And one of the most abundant polymers in the body is actually hyaluronic acid, and that's also a polysaccharide. What we then did was that we metaculated it and we combined it with a gelatin that was thiolated, so the name gelatin is, that is thiolated gelatin, and we used that together to get this 3D system for encapsulating cells and so forward. Obviously, waste from the slaughterhouse is super cheap. Gelatin is FDA approved. Pectin is not FDA approved, but it can easily be FDA approved because it's a polysaccharide, like natural polymers such as alginate and hyaluronic acid. I'm just going to cruise through these results just to give you an idea of what we do besides the electronics part. So here we try to encapsulate stem cells, and as you can see, there are a lot of green color, which is good. That means that this is living cells and the cells are alive. The red color signifies dead cells. So as you can see, there's a lot of green color, and the greenness increases from day 1 to day 14, which indicates that the cells are dividing and they're happy, and this is really fantastic. And obviously, when we have gelatin in the system, it's much better, as you can see when you look at the cell coverage, and that is because pectin is a polysaccharide. It does not have any bioactive moieties that can bind to cells. Gelatin has. And the reason we don't use gelatin alone is that gelatin is derived from collagen, and it can be easily degraded by our own cells through an enzyme or protease called collagenase. But when you combine it with something more inert, like this polysaccharide pectin, it stays more stable. Typically, gelatin hydrogels only last for 1 week in culture. Here we have stability up to actually 2 weeks. And then we were really excited, so we tried to put this in culture for 5 weeks to see what happens. And as I told you in the beginning, bone is composed of a soft phase and a hard phase. The hard phase consists of minerals. It's a mineralized phase. So what we saw after 5 weeks was that the hydrogels that are typically really porous became dense. This is the SEM of the hydrogels after 5 weeks in culture with these stem cells. And then we tried to do some EDAX on it, and we saw that the main composition of this densified matrix was actually calcium and phosphate, and the ratio was 1.68. And if you know about your hydroxyapatite and about bone minerals, you know that the perfect ratio is 1.61. That signifies that it's completely crystalline. It's perfect hydroxyapatite. And we could reach that almost after 5 weeks. We did some FDIR and some XRD that also showed that this is indeed hydroxyapatite. So imagine that you have cells in culture and they start producing minerals. And then after 5 weeks, you get the most important component in bone, in the hard phase of bone, namely hydroxyapatite. So we showed that we could do that after 5 weeks with this simple, cheap system consisting of gelatin from waste, slaughter waste, and a pectin from apple peel skin. So this was then published with one of the first papers from my group. It was published in 2018 in ACS Applied Materials and Interfaces. Then we tried to, make the system a bit more combinatorial. We tried to look into more combinatorial systems that at the same time were scalable. This is a really complicated system with a complicated chemistry. In simple terms, this hydrogel system consisted of alginate. Do you know what alginate is? So alginate you can derive from seaweed. It's really hydrophilic. You can cross-link it with calcium chloride, and you actually use it in cooking. So sometimes when you go in restaurants, you see these small beads, and they taste really good. It's actually alginate that has been cross-linked with something tasty inside them. And the cross-linking occurs by using calcium ions. So really simple cross-linking, because alginate itself is negatively charged. Calcium is positively charged, so they can interact and form a solid hydrogen. So that's really simple. A little bit more complicated is the other component, hyaluronic acid, also a polysaccharide. It has been thiolated, so it can actually cross-link with a cross-linker called polyethylene glycol acrylate, or PEG, because the acrylate groups can form thiol bonds via a Michaelis addition process, which is a covalent bond. So we have a system that consists of two polymers. One is, cross-linked via covalent bond, and the other one with physical bonds. So which bonds are strongest, you think? These bonds or the other bonds? Or do they have the same strength? So obviously, these bonds are super weak. They're electrostatic. Whereas these are covalent, they're chemical, they're really, really strong. So we have a system that is hierarchical with different bonds, with different strengths. And that enables us to get something tough, because this keeps the system intact. Whereas when the system is exposed to mechanical stress, these bonds break, but they reform again because they're reversible, they're physical. So that way we have a dissipation mechanism going on, and we can increase the toughness of the system, as you guys also mentioned in the last session. And then we also added some nanoclays. And nanoclays are fantastic. They are nanomaterials that are 1 nanometer in height, and they can vary their diameter from 25 nanometer to 260 nanometer. Depending on their diameter, they have different names, such as laponite, which is 25 nanometer. Summexon is 140 nanometer, and montolite is 260 nanometer. You might ask, why do we even add these strange nanomaterials? I mean, we are talking biology, we are talking organic systems. Now you add something inorganic. Why do you do that? It's maybe inorganic, but the composition is silica, lithium, magnesium, calcium, sometimes aluminum. These are important bone minerals. So it's inorganic, but bone is also inorganic. So it's a natural thing to combine something organic with something inorganic when we talk bone. So the great thing about these nanoplates is that these minerals will be released and they will interact with the DNA of the cells and increase the expression of bone markers, bone proteins, and accelerate the bone healing process. At the same time, they can also mechanically reinforce the system because they're inorganic and they're stronger than their organic counterparts. So this combinatorial system gives us something tough and load-bearing while still being soft and while still being bioactive because we have these bone minerals that can accelerate the bone healing process. So super combinatorial system, but really great in terms of, first, keeping a high viability up to, 14 days, but also in terms of bone differentiation. So this is an important bone marker called alkaline phosphatase, and the more blue, color you see, the more ALP is present because ALP is stained blue. And as you can see, we have like different combinations. In the x-axis, we have the different nanoclays. M stands for montomontoolite, L laponite is somacton. So it's these three, nanoclays. And then C1 is just, hyaluronic acid, and C2 is hyaluronic acid plus alginate. So we have all of these combinations in total around 48. And as you can see, there is one combination that really stands out, and that's M, montomontoolite. It's more blue, so it seems like this is more osteogenic. We then stained for calcium, which is an important component of hydroxyapatite. And we still saw that this M combination was really fantastic. So we focused on that and did a 5-week study to see if we could induce any bone mineralization. We could. As you can see, in the M's, we had, some texture, some, nanogranulates. We tried to examine those. We found out that those were hydroxyapatite. If you notice, you can see there are some pluses and some minuses. Plus means that you're using differentiation media. So M2 plus means that this is a combination where we add differentiation media to the culture, differentiation factors that forces the stem cells to become bone cells. So you have to ask the question, okay, that's really nice idea, but can you do that inside the body? Obviously, we cannot do that inside the body. That's why we also did it with M2 minus, which is without differentiation factors. We saw the same thing. So the holy grail in stem cell therapy is that you have a material that spontaneously can make stem cells into what you desire them to become without using expensive differentiation factors. And we could achieve this by simply using these nanoplates. And that was really one of the most important, take-home messages from this study, which was published the same year in the same journal. And as you can see, it says that a glimpse of the holy grail in orthopedic stem cell therapy, the holy grail being that you can force a stem cell to become a bone cell by just using a material property or a different material and not using differentiation factors. So now we're going to talk about, the self-healing and why that is important for these, studies. And we started this journey towards self-healing systems with a review paper that was published in Advanced Science. This has been cited since then 200 times. This year alone has got, I think, 40 citations. So people love self-healing, and after you publish this, I get like every week a paper about self-healing that they wanted to review from Advanced Materials and Nature Communications. So this was a really good paper to get out about self-healing. And after that, the whole, self-healing stuff started to be, more important in the field. And why self-healing? And first of all, bone is a load-bearing organ, so we need something that also is durable. We need something that can heal when it breaks and something that, doesn't just disappear after a couple of loading cycles, because we do a lot of walking and a lot of running every day, and we, our implants have to endure this. And so having self-healingness can actually make these, systems more durable in these load-bearing systems. And we made a self-healing system that I cannot disclose the exact, chemistry because it's being patented. But as you can see, it's really cool. We have like 2 different hydrogels, one with graphene, one without graphene. When we cut them and connect them, they self-heal. And as you also showed in your presentation, we can, with SEM, we can actually follow the self-healing, and we can see that after 24 hours, we have perfect self-healing. We tried to see how efficient the self-healing was, and the self-healing efficiency is defined as the mechanical properties, before you break them, and the mechanical properties after they heal. So if they are the same, it means that you have like a 100% self-healing efficiency. As you can see, after 1 hour, we had 80%. After 24 hours, we reached 100%. Then we did rheology, where you break the hydrogels with shear, and then you allow them to heal. And we saw that we could actually, get, efficiency up around to 90%. So what's amazing about self-healing hydrogels is that, if I can run this, is that they're so good for 3D printing. When you see this picture, you say that this is not good, Ali. You're printing crumples. You're destroying the material. Yeah, but this is self-healing. So after, a few minutes in water, you get that. And the reason that this is exciting is that in extrusion printing, it's really easy to print water, but water, you cannot build multiple layers. You can also print honey, but honey, again, you cannot print multiple layers. It flows. So you want to have a material that once it's printed, it will not spill over. So you can print multiple layers without the different layers spilling over. And how do you do that? You do that by having something that is as solid as possible. But the more solid it becomes, the more difficult it is to print it, right? But what if you have something that is really solid and you can print it, but by giving it so much pressure that you break it, but then it heals again. So then you can actually print something that is really solid, that doesn't spill over. And you can do that with self-healing. So once we were printing this, it looked really bad, but it healed like that. So that's one of the good properties about self-healing as well, is that it's really good for 3D bioprinting. We did some cell studies where we saw that the cells were really viable, even after 3 days, not that many dead cells. But what was really super exciting about this study was that after 5 weeks, we saw again the formation of hydroxyapatite. But when we went to the in vivo studies, we saw something quite fantastic, namely that after only 8 weeks, we could reach, up to almost 60% bone formation without even using cells. And you might ask, like, why is this even fantastic? This is fantastic because of several reasons. Firstly, there is this consensus in the field that if you're trying to, heal bone, you have to use something that is hard. You have to use a polymeric scaffold that has a stiffness of, 1 gigapascal, or at least 100 megapascal, because that's bone. Bone is hard. You have to use something hard. It does not make sense to use something soft like a hydrogel. It doesn't work. Why would you even do that? And the other consensus is that, that you need to have cells if you even want to use these systems to kind of like, increase the bone formation rate. This is a system that is really soft. It's 20 kilopascal. There is no cells in it. We put it into a calvarian defect up here in the skull of a rat. After 2 months, we reached 60%. Typically, with hard polymeric scaffold, it's between 20 to 60%. So we could actually reach the same thing without cells. And we actually saw that the more self-healing the system was, because the blue one is more self-healing, the higher repair we saw. And we believe that this is because of the native cells migrating into these hydrogels from the surrounding tissue. And they can do that because this is a self-healing system. This is a system that is reversible and dynamic, so cells can break it up, mold it, and play with it. Whereas if you use rigid systems, if the cells do that, the system breaks forever. So this is a system that enables cells to penetrate it and enables the natural remodeling process that you have in the human body, because it's soft and self-healing like natural tissues. But I mean, one of our focus areas, is not on glucose markers or on biomarkers, is on motion, because motion is something that you can, monitor easily, and that can give you a wealth of information in terms of the human health. I mean, motion is really important. Motion is what makes us alive. Motion gives us freedom. Motion allows us to play music, do sports, and if we can monitor that motion, we can also assist people in these leisure activities. But motion is also important in terms of health. I mean, if you, for instance, become old, and sometimes when you become old, you're in a nursing home, you're not that much aware of who you are, of your surroundings. Maybe you don't notice if your heart rate is going up. Maybe you don't notice that you're getting more dizzy because of high blood pressure, because you don't have that same alertness. And maybe you have you don't notice that your hand is shaking more. But if you have these motion sensors somehow woven into socks or t-shirts, and then they're monitoring the elderly 24/7, then you have an alert system that can say, okay, this guy's heartbeat is higher than before. This guy is not active as he was before, or woman. And why is that? Why, last week he was walking around a lot, but this week he's just sitting in the bed. What's going on here? Maybe he's depressed, maybe he has some conditions with his heart. Let's do a checkup on him or her. So that is really important. Also, of course, in terms of Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's, when you have those diseases, you start to shake. What if you can monitor those shakings? What if you can monitor those impairment movements by using textiles that can monitor motion in real time? Then you have a good way of securing a high well-being even in the elderly population, and that's really an important thing, because the average expectancy in lifetime is growing exponentially. You have fewer younger people and more elderlies. And if we don't do anything about their health, then at some point there will be nobody to take care of them. So we want our elderly population to be healthy up till their 60s and 70s. And we want to secure them, a healthy aging. And with motion sensing, that could be a important factor. So we have different types of materials that we can use for this purpose. One of the first ones was composed of silk and laponite. It gave us this really amazing transparent material that was super strong, that had a high thermal stability, it was flexible, and it could be used for touch sensitivity, but also for motion sensing. And as you can see in these images, when we attached the sensor to the wrist, we could monitor the movement of the wrist, not only the movement, but also the speed of the movement. So we tried to publish that, and it got published in Advanced Science. So yeah, this was, published in Advanced Science in 2019. We got a front cover out of it. It was really nice. And then we tried to use, these sensors for the electronic glove, which is a glove that can monitor the motion of your fingers. And this is important because if you can monitor the motion of your fingers and your hand, you can also monitor sign language. And if you have an app on a phone, you can translate that sign language into sound, and thereby those who cannot speak can start to speak again by using a glove and a mobile phone with an app that can translate sign motions to sounds. But also what we're doing right now is that we're trying to see if we can also use these electronic gloves for exercise tool, because if you have a hand injury, you have to train your hand for it to become strong. But who wants to do that firstly, and how do you do it? Because it's difficult, right? So what if you have a glove that can monitor your training and tell you if you're doing something wrong? So you can use these electronic gloves for a number of exciting things. We have patented this technology, and we have shown that we can, in a simple and feasible way, add these silk laponite electrodes to a glove and use it for motion sensing. As you can see here, we can easily monitor the motion of all 5 fingers really easily. This was the first prototype. Our newest prototype is actually wireless. You can do all of this wirelessly. And the sensors, that we're using, do you guess how much they cost per sensor? Yeah, around €1. The most expensive part is actually this one. This costs, I guess, like €7. But you can get it cheaper if you upscale it. So this is something that costs like, I don't know, €7. How much do you think they're sold for right now? €1,000 is typically, maybe more. So one of the really key advantages is that we can do this with these cheap sensors that are derived from silk and from natural, materials, and they're also recyclable and green. So we also use the sensors to develop a smart sock, the same sensor as we used here, because if you have like issues with your circulatory system, if you have issues with, for instance, deep vein thrombosis, where your veins and your lower limbs are disrupted, or you have a blood clot, different things happen. The first thing is that you get more heat in that area. The second thing is that you get a swelling in that area. So if you can add sensors that can monitor the temperature change and the swelling, then you can also monitor whether a patient at risk of getting DVT should be called into a conversation with the physicians or with a doctor. So we tried to put these sensors in the sock, and we showed that when we swell the sock, then we can get a signal. As you can see, it swells. Then we see that the signal changes. So this is something that we were trying hard to get commercialized, but we're still working on that actually. So if you wanna, if you wanna kind of like spin out, don't come to Denmark. Denmark is a wonderful country. It's a beautiful country with beautiful people and beautiful education system, but they're a bit conservative, and there's not that much money there. So if you want to spin out, like a lot of the stuff that doesn't get funding in Denmark, I go to Holland, they're like, well, we love it. Let's do something crazy with it. So they're a little bit more adventurous in the States, and also Holland is an amazing place for stuff like that. So then we also developed something called the care gum. Care gum is short for a material that is conductive, adhesive, remoldable, and elastic, or viscoelastic, because it's not elastic, it's viscoelastic. That's an error. So care gum has all of these amazing properties, as you saw in the previous hour. Like, it's moldable, it's stretchable, it's self-heating, it's adhesive, it's 3D printable. It can be used as a strain sensor, and we will see that there will be 4 more properties added to that in the final slides, because we have other care gum variants coming out. And as you can see, like, when you break it, you can connect it, and then you can stretch it, you can mold it. It can be stretched from 2 millimeter to 150 millimeter. It's super stretchable, it heals quickly. It's really amazing, but you might ask, okay, it can do all of these things, but so I can play with it, like play and dock. I don't know if you've seen these, for children, these, toys were like, they're like slime, and you can mold them. So you can maybe sell it as a toy, right? But is that it? I mean, if that's it, then it's kind of like, worthless, right? It's just fun to look at. But can we use these special properties for something unique? So when I first saw this, it was in 2016. Some of my students, they just did a study by mixing some components. They got this, and then I saw it, and we didn't know anything about it. And I was like, okay, this could actually be cool if we could give it some functionality. If we have something like an electronic circuit or something electronic, a device that can have these properties, then we are in business. So we try to look at electrical properties and we try to enhance the electrical properties by incorporating nanofillers, like nanomaterials that are conductive. And we could see that by doing that, we could actually use this as a circuit to, illuminate an LED lamp. But what we also noticed was that when we cut this in pieces, obviously the circuit is short circuit, the lamp stops glowing, but you could easily connect it quickly to initiate the glowing of the lamp again. And even if it was stretched, or if it was twisted or double twisted and stretched. So then I was thinking that, maybe we could use this for something unique in terms of flexible electronics. And we tried to explore these properties more in terms of motion sensing. Here we attached a sensor to the wrist and shoulder and elbow and knee. And we could show that when we move these, limbs, we saw an increase in resistance. So what you see here on the y-axis is something called delta R over R0. R0 is the resistance in the equilibrium state, and delta R is a resistance change. So what happens is that when you stretch this sensor, fold it, the resistance increases. So what we're actually monitoring is the resistance increase, or the ratio between the resistance increase delta R and the original resistance. So that's why you're seeing all of these, signal changes. So it's a really simple procedure to monitor these, movements, because they're linked, intimately with the resistance change and the electrical properties. And the material is super versatile. You can conform it to the human body. You can weave it into textiles. You can print it. You can make printable circuits out of it. You can use it to light a LED lamp. When it breaks, it heals quickly. So it's really amazing. And we try to come up with other applications. For instance, if you have Parkinson's, your hands, they shake. And what happens is that the way they diagnose Parkinson's patients is that they go to a doctor, and the doctor asks them, how do you feel? And then you tell them that, I don't feel that well. And then they ask you, can I see? And then you show them your hand, and then they say like, yeah, it seems like you're not feeling well. So it's subjective. It's subjective diagnostics, it's subjective, treatment. And then you give them a pill, and then they go home, and then they come back again, and then you ask them, how did you feel that this pill helped you? And then you say, from a 0 to a 10, I give it a 5. And then they say, let me see your hands again. Yeah, it seems like it's not a 5, it's a 6. But the thing is that many things happen when a patient sleeps, right? And the thing is that there's a lot of, objective data that is lost. So all of the diagnostics, all of the, Parkinson's therapies are based on subjective assessments. So you're subjectively assessing whether the drug works or not. But what if you could actually, use a sleeve like this that you could just wear, and then it would objectively monitor, the way you were moving. Also, if that changed if you were using drugs against Parkinson's. For instance, we found out that there's this muscle called brachioradialis that actually connects the movement of your hand. So by having a sensor attached to that, we can actually see how you move your hands. For instance, if you clench your fist, or if you move your thumb. Also, if you do complex movements like drinking from a cup of coffee, placing the cup back, or whether you rotate your hand counterclockwise or, the other way around, we could monitor all of that. And this is something that could be used, and will be used in the future. Maybe, we will not do that in our group because, as you see, there are a lot of applications. We are 10 people. We cannot follow all of these applications. But I'm sure in the future, 10 years from now, Parkinson's disease will be monitored by either, wearables like this, or, maybe, from socks that can monitor your walking and so forward. That is going to be the future in Parkinson's disease management. I will bet my old hat on that. And this paper was published, I guess, last year, actually, in ACS Nano. And then we go back to our latest Caregon paper that was so well presented by Anna and Serna, I guess that's your name, Sasha. So I'm not going to go in depth with this because you guys cover it really well. But this was also, something that, besides being self-healing, besides being stretchable, besides being adhesive, we could also use this to kind of like, make these textiles, to make these threads that could be used to make these self-healing textiles. And we could also use it for printing, also for 3D printing. So you already know that, that this material can be used for motion sensing, but we have shown that it's also a pH sensor. The same material here that we have used in the glove, that we have used, for motion sensing, the same material, you can do all of this cool stuff that you have seen, is actually also a pH sensor. Not only you can measure the pH value by measuring the impedance, but you can also see a color change. It's a humidity sensor. The humidity changes. The resistance changes when the humidity increases. It's a temperature sensor. These are important, biophysical markers. If you have infection, if you have a wound and the wound is healing, it's important what the pH value is there, because if the pH value drops, it indicates that you have an infection. If the temperature increases, it indicates that the wound is inflamed. And the humidity is also important in terms of the wound healing process. How much humidity you have is also a marker for that. But temperature was also important, as I showed you, for monitoring deep vein thrombosis, right? pH value is important in cancers. When you have cancer, the surroundings are actually acidic. So these are simple parameters, but they're important. So in combination with pressure sensing and strain sensing, you have a multifunctional sensor that can do all of this while still being adaptable to the human body and while being, €1. And this is the unique thing about what we are doing and about the CareGum is that we're trying to make something multifunctional as the human body. If you take your skin, it's really flexible, it's self-healing. The skin can monitor the temperature, the skin can monitor pressure, the skin can monitor a lot of stuff, but it's one material, it's one living material, and you call it skin. So this is what we are trying to do, is to kind of like have something living like human tissues that can do as much as they can, but at a really, really low cost. So we talked about this as well, that we could use this glove for virtual gaming and virtual reality surgery, but also, as you can see, we can translate signs. For instance, the sign for DTU is what is shown there. So we can do that with the glove. When we do that, we can actually transport this, this movement into a virtual world where we have a virtual hand doing the same. So we have like this link between the metaverse and the real world, and we are actually able to have 5 channels. So here you see that if we do like this, none of the channels are changing, and this means stop in sign language. If we do like this, we are using 2 fingers, and you see a signal change in 2 of the fingers. That corresponds to okay, victory is a bit more complicated. So you can see that the channels corresponding to the movement of the fingers that corresponds to victory, they change as well. So we have like this link between the 5 channels and the way we can, move the fingers into different signs. They can be used for sign language translation. But importantly, this was based on the CareGum. So this was a self-healing and an unbreakable glove, because when we, cut the sensor, it become impaired, so the signal stopped, it quickly heal again, actually. So we have something that is self-healing and unbreakable. Like, if you cut your skin, it doesn't mean that it stops monitoring, temperature or whatever it has to monitor, because it will heal again eventually and do what it's supposed to do again. So what is next? I mean, now you saw some cool stuff about the CareGums. So we are working on these CareGels. CareGels are a bit more softer than the CareGums. The CareGum has a water content of 35%, the CareGels 90%. So these hydrogels are also adhesive and flexible and self-healing, but they can also do something called shape memory. Shape memory is that you have a shape, and you want that shape to go into the body. But you can do that either by cutting the patient up with a knife and with a, and really doing some nasty stuff, and then putting the implant inside the patient, or you can crumple it and inject it, where it will return back to its original, configuration afterwards. So that's really cool. And the past year, we've tried to kind of like combine liquid metals with some of these systems to get what we want to coin the care metals. So if you've seen Terminator 2, it was published, or not published, it was broadcasted in the cinemas around the world in 1992. There's this robot, the T-1000, and it's really liquid-like and self-healing, and when you shoot it, it can heal itself, and it can kind of like flow, and then it can become a robot again, and do all of those cool stuff. And that's the vision about the care metal, and it sounds crazy, but I think it's possible to do so, and it's not a distant dream. I mean, we are not that far away. So that's also something that we are working on in our group right now, the care gels and care metals, and this paper was published in 2021. Thank you for inviting me. I mean, you can always get in touch with us in social media. We are really active in social media. You can just, type in hashtag Team Bioengine, and you can see all of the stuff we have done on Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and so forth. Yeah. Okay.
It's a fantastic talk. Very, very nice. We have time for questions. Any questions for Julio?
What's the behavior of the hydrogel material in contact with the skin? Is it adhesive on the skin? Is it conductive with respect to the electrophysiological signals that you may record?
Mm-hmm. So it's adhesive, up to 10 to 20 kilopascal. So that means that you can put it on the skin and it stays there even if you do like this, but you can also easily remove it from the skin. In terms of measuring electrophysical measurements from the body, we have shown that if we take two pieces of muscle tissue and we break it and we use the care gum to heal it, the conductivity is the same as it was before you broke them. But if you use, for instance, fibrin glue, you would not have the same electrical properties. So by using the care gum to heal living tissues, we can actually maintain the electrical properties before the tissues were broken. So we have also done some studies on that as well. Yeah.
Okay. Any other question? So, please.
Hello. Hello. Actually, I have a very silly question. Like, are all the wearables that you're creating, like, are they wired, or do you have wireless versions of it too? Like,
we have recently managed to do it wirelessly.
Okay.
And I mean, with some of these, products, we are also, receive some money to kind of like build, and design, better prototypes. So we are now working with companies that are designers, companies that specifies in miniaturizing and making electronics that we're using simpler and easier for the patient to accept. So the first versions that you're seeing now are really bulky, but there are other versions coming along that are wireless and so forward. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other question? Okay.
Hello. Well, thank you very much for the nice talk.
Yeah.
I have two questions. The first one is really short. Which is more or less the resistivity of the gum care?
Yeah.
Just to have an order in 5 centimeters, something like that. And the second one is about the challenge of the transmission of the energy. You know that one of the challenges to avoid the use of batteries. So I don't know if you are thinking to use low energy Bluetooth, or which is the thing you are going to use for the transmission in the wearables you are designing. Thank you.
That was good questions. So in terms of the resistance, I'm going to mention, because I have the numbers, I've worked with conductivity, my students that work with resistance, but the conductivity, ranges in our systems from 10 minus the fourth S over centimeter, S being C, to 10 minus 1. And you might say, but that's too low because metals, they're like copper is 10 in sixth, and P dot is 1000 S per centimeter. But those are based on electron transport. These are ionic conductors. But in the human body, in the cerebrospinal fluid, where we have the highest conductivity, the conductivity is 10 minus 3 S per centimeter. So we are matching the conductivities in the human body. And because the conductivities are so low, we don't require that much power. That answers your second question. That's why that is not an issue for us. We are not, using, high energy or high conductivity or high voltages. So, our consumption of power is in the milliwatt regime, or sometimes even less. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, hello, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
I also have two questions. One is, in an eventual application of the bones that you produce, would you have to use stem cells from the patient to avoid immune response or rejection?
Yeah.
And if I may ask also the second question, which is shorter, why do you exactly use graphene oxide in the healing part?
Mm-hmm. In the self-healing hydrogels?
Sorry?
In the self-healing hydrogels or in the keragams?
In the bone part.
Okay. I mean, so there are different types of stem cells to use. You can use them from fat tissue from the own patient. So like we can take the cells from your fat tissue, and these will then be mesenchymal stem cells, and they can in theory also lead to bone and cartilage and so forward. Or we can take them from, from your bone marrow, which is a bit more invasive to do so. And we can also take them from another patient, but that's not super good. But in terms of, what is being used in the clinic and what is approved, those are stem cells taken from the bone marrow. And you have like a lot of, products actually right now on the market based on that. Even though I still think that taking them from the fat tissue is less invasive, there still needs to be done more studies on that before it's FDA approved and can be used in patients. And there's still a little bit doubt, will they be as good as the ones from the bone marrow, because they're more potent. So that question is an ongoing question. Regarding a second question, I mean, I tried to, start out with saying that, okay, there is a link between the tissue engineering and the cybernetics, and the link being that these self-healing hydrogels should be conductive. So we can use, for instance, those hydrogels, we can use them in for instance, let's say we use them in the knee to deliver stem cells to heal the knee tissue. What's important is, also to monitor, how is the knee moving, how are you moving, what is the pressure being inserted on the target side. But by using graphene oxide in a hydrogel, we can also develop a pressure sensor and a strain sensor, because when you stretch it, the graphene oxide will be farther away, the conductivity drops. When you compress it, the graphene oxide plates will become closer, and the conductivity, goes up. So in that way, we can monitor those elements as well. So that was the reason why we added graphene to the system, to make it electrically active and enable us to make stem cell therapies and tissue engineering scaffolds that are also active electrically and can be used to monitor patient health.
Thank you. Any other question from here? Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I don't have any background in material science, so I don't know if it's a good question, but in silk-based keragam, how do you decide which chemicals to use? Because I guess there are thousands of chemicals. How do you choose the chemicals to use?
I mean, so we sit, in the office and we write grants where we design some things. But, the sad part is that what you design on the drawing board can only be as good as what you have designed. And most likely it's going to be 50% worse than what you intended. This is really fantastic because nobody designed it. It happened by accident, where some of my students, they combined some stuff. So we got something we didn't expect. So that's the advantage of just giving scientists money so they can do these crazy stuff. because then you can get something beyond expectation, right? And this is one of these episodes of that. Yeah.
Okay, good. Any other last question, or I can do the last question? So thank you very much again. It's fantastic talk.
Yeah,
I have just a question about the long-term stability of the
That's a good
materials,
question, yeah.
and also in relation to the sensors, for example, pH or humidity. Is the sensor reversible? So
in terms of temperature and pH value and humidity, it is reversible. In terms of stability, our first sensor, the one called SIPO, which was composed of silicon lanthanide, we have shown that after 1 year, it remains operational. But Keragam, we have shown after 1 month, but we have to encapsulate them in hydrophobic polymers for them to be stable. But we are working on new variants where we are trying to make them stable without using these encapsulating layers. So stability is an issue, but that's an issue that prevails if you're using it in a dry environment, not if you're using it inside the body, which is what
because you may need also to wash probably these.
They're washable. They are not degradable, so they can be in a cellular environment for up to 1 month without degrading. So they are quite stable. But
So I think we should end now. I would like, on your behalf, and of course BIST ICN2, thank you very much for this very interesting talk and for coming here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So it was really a pleasure, and congratulations for the great work you are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for being here.